Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Jack Farmer. He's Andy Rossi. This is the Evolution of Movies show. And Andy, before we get into the guests, how are you doing today?
Oh, that's so sweet of you. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm actually doing pretty good here because we have a special guest here that is the perfect fit for the movie we are about to review. He's a good pal of mine, but also he's actually got some insights into the world of these types of movies. Let's quit waiting. Let's bring him on right now. Ladies and gentlemen, introducing from comicbook.com, Liam Crowley. Liam, thanks for coming on to chat about the movie.
Well, thank you for having me, Jack. This has been a long time coming. I remember you reached out a couple months ago. You guys plan very in-depth with your movies that you cover, and I love that. And Spider-Man 2, it's an all-time classic, and I'm stoked to dive into it with you guys.
Yeah, I just get ahead of myself. I'm like, oh, you know who would be a perfect guest? Liam. Let me ask him. Oh, yeah, we're not recording that for like 4 months, but whatever.
I can't do it next week. That's fine. We're not recording for 5 months.
Yeah, it was funny. I asked you before you were with comicbook.com, and I was like, oh, no, will he be allowed to be on the show anymore? I don't know what the rules are with all that, but they'll never find out. No one watches this show.
Hey.
But
I'll be watching on replay.
Well, thank you. That'll triple our numbers if 3 people watch it. You're at comicbook.com. Cool. That's like, I think, a dream job for a lot of people to be able to work there and talk about comic books, especially with how big comic book movies are getting. What do you do over there? What's going on with that? And can you tell us who the next Wolverine is going to be?
So I don't know who the next Wolverine is going to be. I think it's going to be Taron Egerton, just because of all the rumors and the way he answers questions in interviews when it gets brought up. I'm like, he knows something more than he's letting on. So I think Taron Egerton is probably the likely option. I want Karl Urban. I know he's already in the MCU as Scourge the Executioner, but after watching The Boys, Billy Butcher is Logan, like straight up. Just shave the beard and some mutton chops, and you got it right there. But yeah, with comicbook.com, I've kind of just combined what I was doing before. For anyone that followed my content before, I was with The Direct and Wrestling Inc., covering pro wrestling and mostly Marvel movies. At Comic Book, it's all under one banner. So I do still Marvel, wrestling, and a whole bunch of different avenues of film, TV, pop culture. So it's fun to get to have that bit of variety in my life when it comes to daily responsibilities. And then as for what I do, it's a lot of article writing mainly. On top of that, I create TikToks for them. I do some interviews. I got to chat with Lawrence Kasdan yesterday, the writer of Star Wars, which was epic.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's just been a lot of fun.
Very cool. Well, I'm glad you were able to make time to be on the show with us today. Now, the show, for anyone who's new, who's listening to it or watching it for the first time, it's the evolution of movies. And basically what we do is we watch a movie and then we just chat about it book club style, but we call it the evolution of movies because we always watch a movie that came out 1 year after the last movie we watched. So we started in 1980, went to 1981, 1982. Now we're all the way up to 2004, a time when movie theaters were filled with hits like The Aviator, Crash, and of course, Without a Paddle. But we aren't watching any of those. We're talking about Spider-Man 2, a movie IMDb describes as Peter Parker is beset with troubles in his failing personal life as he battles a brilliant scientist named Dr. Otto Octavius. Now, Liam, I know the answer to this, but I ask all of our guests when we start the show, have you seen this movie before, and what were your thoughts going into it this time around?
Well, I've seen it a couple times. I didn't get to see this one in theaters. My first movie, my first comic book movie I ever saw in theaters actually was the sequel to this, Spider-Man 3. And a lot of people, pan that movie in hindsight, and I understand the critical woes about it, but it's got a nostalgic root to me. And that's a lot of the reason why I love Spider-Man 2 as well, because I caught it on DVD in the lead up to Spider-Man 3 when that came out in 2007. And critically, it's a much better film, from Act 1 to Act 3 compared to its predecessor, Spider-Man 1, as well as the sequel, Spider-Man 3. I will say I have actually soured on it a little bit as we get into a modern age of comic book movies. I think some of the visual effects don't hold up as well. I think some of the character tropes feel very tropey. You know what I mean? Like back then it was like, oh, this is just how comic book movies are. Nowadays it's looked at as like we're rolling our eyes at some of the lines of dialogue and the character decisions. And beyond that too, we've been blessed with Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland since then, two guys who are incredible as Spider-Man. When you compare them to Tobey Maguire in 2004. Tobey Maguire was great at the time, but I also think he's held to a different standard nowadays when you have your Hollands and Garfields and everything. So still a very enjoyable movie, but it has fallen down my rankings every time I rewatch.
You know, it's a fair assessment because I like this movie. I love Tobey Maguire, but you can definitely see that comic book movies are a lot. You got to be a lot better nowadays to be a good comic book movie than you used to in the past. But I'll be honest, I started to dip on this movie, but I don't want to get too far into other movies. But No Way Home made me like all the Spider-Man movies again a lot more, just the way they tied everything together. So I was a big fan of it. But this one, now when we start the show, Liam, we always like to do a little game here. And what we do is we have Andy here. He's just going to try to guess the Rotten Tomatoes score. And then you're going to try to guess whether or not the actual score is higher or lower than what Andy guesses.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So it was up against Without a Paddle. So, I mean, really hard competition in 2004. Was that the one with Matthew Lillard and like Seth Green? Is that Without a Paddle?
The classic, right up there. I think you think of Aviator, Without a Paddle, Crash. They're all kind of in the same.
Yeah, they're all like in the same. 2004 is just all brilliant movies. Okay, so Spider-Man, the one that came out before this one, I think was critically acclaimed as well. And I remember this one, hearing about it, they're like, part 2 is even better or just as good. So probably scored pretty well. So I'm gonna go. Let's see here. I'm gonna go 89.
89. That is a very high pick. Liam, now this one was a critically acclaimed movie. It was very well loved. To give you an idea of what some of the rankings have been in the previous years, Mystic River came in at 88 and Scorpion King came in at 46. So that'll give you kind of an idea of where we're at here.
43 points higher than it should have.
So do you think that what was your pick again, Andy? Was it 86?
89.
89? Do you think it was higher or lower than 89%?
Part of me thinks that it's in the 90s just because of where people place this movie on like all-time comic book movie rankings. But I'm gonna go low. I'm gonna say it's around 87, so lower than the
close
89.
though.
Very close. The actual Rotten Tomatoes score is 93%.
Oh, dang.
It got into the 90s, and I love this movie.
Wow.
All due respect, though, I don't know if it's a 93.
Yeah, I think Indiana Jones was like a 93.
Yeah, this is up in Indiana Jones territory.
Yeah.
So I was very on board with all the Spider-Man movies when they came out. I loved them. And again, like I said, after seeing No Way Home, I was doubly into them. I feel like they all aged better after No Way Home. So I was very eager to swing back into this one. But Liam, you hit some points that I kind of agree with. The special effects didn't quite hold up, even as well as Spider-Man 1 did for some reason. It felt like they jumped out a lot more in this one than Spider-Man 1. But we'll get into it. We'll chat about it. Before we break it all down, thanks to everyone who's watching, liking, commenting, subscribing, all that good stuff. Thank you for being here. Share it with your friends. Leave a 5-star review. Why don't you?
Yeah.
You guys ready to talk about this movie?
Let's. I like what you said before. You said let's swing into it. You said something about swinging in.
Yes.
I caught it.
I
caught it.
I'm very clever.
Let's web sling into it.
So we get a credit scene with the iconic Spider-Man music and artwork catching us up on what went down in Spider-Man 1. Peter Parker tells us that he's made the decision to keep his hero life separate from his regular life to keep his loved ones safe, which is good because his personal life is a wreck and he has a reputation for being undependable. This doesn't stop him from using his powers to deliver some pizza, which due to saving some kids still ends up being late. That's not the end of the bad news. Even as he sells out to the Bugle, he's behind on his advances and he misses his classes with Dr. Connors. Then he forgets his own birthday. The night ends as Peter fights about taking money from his financially struggling aunt, and he promises MJ he'll go to her play as she says she may have found a new fella in her life. Liam, I always like to start with this question. Tell us about the characters of this movie and the world that they inhabit.
Well, Peter Parker, as you said it, his life is kind of spiraling right now because he's trying to juggle the two aspects of who he is, that being Peter Parker, the student, the family man, and the boyfriend, as well as trying to be Spider-Man, the crime-fighting hero, while still maintaining a secret identity. I know in the modern age of the MCU, a lot of heroes are publicly known who they are to other people. We even see that explored with the majority of No Way Home. That makes your life a little bit easier, makes your life a little bit more dangerous, but it does allow you to, juggle less aspects. And Peter Parker's showing it full through in the opening scenes of this movie. The play scene breaks my heart every single time because he wants to be there, but this dude just has terrible time management skills and he's, trying to make ends meet, put himself through college while also saving the city every now and then. And you really feel for Peter Parker. That's something I think that Tobey Maguire does a really good job of, is not letting his emotions show out too much. And it almost makes it feel more hurtful as an audience member because you're like, damn, this dude is just accepting that this is how life is. Like, he's not upset by it. He's not being beaten down. Anytime he stumbles along the way, he's like, oh, well, this is the life I chose. And it's like, damn, man, sometimes we want you to just take a victory.
Yeah, he's quietly tough. I mean, Wolverine is the guy that he gets beat up and you're like, of course he's tough. But Peter Parker, it definitely has a emotional toughness of that. He just takes beating after beating emotionally and in life, but continues to press on. Andy, I haven't fact checked this at all. And Liam, maybe you can correct me on this, but this feels like the first major superhero movie that really shows the difficulties of balancing being a hero and being a normal person. Whereas other movies like Blade wasn't like, oh man, I have to get to work tomorrow or anything
it's
like
tough
that.
Killing vampires. First of all, I like the credits scene, how it like caught you up on what happened in the first one. Because for me, there's so many Spider-Man movies. I'm trying to figure out, wait, what happened in the last one? But I know that he's Spider-Man. And that's what got me really frustrated in the beginning. I'm like, you're freaking Spider-Man. What are you doing delivering pizzas? I just thought it was just like an interesting start to it's just like, since the first movie, what has happened? Oh, he's delivering pizzas. I don't know. I was just kind of like, man, you're Spider-Man. You got so much more that you could be doing right now. And just him doing that, I thought was a little beneath him. But like Liam said, I did feel for him because, yeah, he's in love with MJ and she's in love with him. And she's like totally hitting on him in that scene and then says, I'm seeing someone. I'm like, what was that? I'm like, you're like giving him all this false hope. Like, I thought they were going to like start kissing there. And then she's like, oh, I'm seeing someone. And then he's just like, what? So I'm just like, dude, Spider-Man, yet he's delivering pizzas. Can't get Kirsten Dunst. Yeah, you just really feel for him.
Liam, if you had seen our review of Spider-Man 1 last year, you would know that I am not a fan of MJ. I think she's just a toxic friend to Peter Parker throughout all these movies.
She's low down.
And Andy hit the nail on the head again. She's flirting with him, but then she's like, oh, I'm taken. Sorry. But Liam, I want to talk to you about how in this opening scene, especially with the birthday party, you sort of see how MJ's thriving. She's got a big play. She's in these ads. Harry is taking over his dad's business. He's doing great. But Peter Parker and Aunt May, they're struggling. And to Andy's point with the delivery service, it even shows that in his personal life, it is just failing in every way. But all of his friends seem to be doing great.
Yeah, the Nobel Prize, Otto. I know we're going to get to that eventually, but Harry Osborn, he's super charismatic. You can tell that he's loving life. And same thing with MJ too. Even though her plays don't always go out to perfection, she's in a really good spot with who she's with, her career, and everything. So yeah, I think kicking off with that birthday scene, especially with him being taken by surprise with the whole nature of it, of like, oh man, it's my birthday and everything. And I do have a support system, like reminding himself that, he does have people around him that loves him. I think it's a really clever scene to kick off with, and props to Sam Raimi and the writing team for having something like that early on in the film. Because yeah, like I said before, when it comes to him trying to deliver that pizza, get it in on time, make it to the play, we're just beating you over the head with this guy is just like, he's in such an unfortunate situation. And, well, obviously people know how this movie ends, but it almost makes the resolution when we get there that much more satisfying.
I gotta shout out one part, and it's totally, you mentioned Sam Raimi. I love Sam Raimi. And I feel like it's his comedy in that scene where Peter Parker comes in with the pizzas and he's in like a storage closet. And it goes on for like just a little bit too long that I was literally laughing out loud. Like, I don't know what he's doing, but everything, it was like a Three Stooges kind of scene. He's like dropping mops and brooms and stuff. And then she's like, you're late.
Yeah, where he keeps trying to like put the brooms back in. Every time he puts one in, the
was
other one
pretty
falls.
great.
And by the way, the receptionist is Deschanel, right?
Yeah,
What's her?
Emily Deschanel.
Yeah, they there's a ton of people in this movie. They're like, hey, it's that person.
Yeah, Elizabeth Banks is in there.
Even people in the background, you're like,
Betty Brant, right?
yeah. Yeah, it's they're all they even like on the train, there was a guy from In Living Color, I think, on there as well. But there's a lot of people you're just like, oh yeah, that guy. But as we continue on,
Yeah, the guy from the Chappelle Show, I think, yelled out like Spider-Man took his pizza.
Yeah, he's another one that you're just like, oh hey, that guy's in that movie. Peter Parker, he's a month late on rent again, and he meets with Dr. Octavius, and Otto says that intelligence is a gift that you use for mankind. They talk about science that I'm sure is all completely accurate regarding a fusion something or other, and continue to hit it off and chat about life and science. Later, Peter is on his way to MJ's performance when crime is afoot. So he springs into action as Spider-Man and saves the day, but it causes him to be late, and Bruce Campbell stops him from coming in to see the show. Peter waits outside for MJ, and MJ kisses a fella. This gets into his head, and suddenly he can't shoot webs anymore. The next day at a payphone, Peter tries to apologize to MJ when he runs out of time, and then he tries to tell her that he's Spider-Man. So Peter goes to watch Doc Ock turn into the bad guy, and I mean, come on, would you look at those arms? He's clearly the bad guy. Octavius puts the power of the sun into his hands, and all the people watching with absolutely no protection at all run away. But Peter doesn't run. He swings into action as Spider-Man. Anyways, he fails, and Octavius's wife dies in dramatic fashion, and the electricity turns Octavius evil. Well, the arms are evil. They control him, so he's evil. And he kills the doctors, and we get one of those epic no moments before he finds a new secret lair. So lots of stuff happening here. This is setting the stage of the entire kind of who the villain is and all that good stuff. Liam, I want to talk to you. This is the introduction of one of the most iconic villains in Spider-Man's gallery here, Doc Ock.
Yeah, and what a great aesthetic looking Spider-Man villain as well, because he's a little cartoony on the page and all that, with the green and the yellow suit and the tentacle arms. I think he also wears like goggles too. And the way that they kind of upgraded him for the movie, switching out the goggles for some sunglasses, giving him the trench coat, but still having the arms be mechanical and having them be more technologically advanced and have them fit into this world. I thought it was awesome and mesmerizing. And a big shout out to Alfred Molina, the actor behind Otto Octavius, obviously, because he's someone who comes in and there's supposed to be this kind of implied relationship with him and Peter Parker. And that's so difficult to do in a sequel because we're coming off of a movie where we're already familiar with so many characters we already know. And meeting a new character can sometimes be a tall order. But he just kind of comes in so naturally, and there's clear chemistry between himself and Tobey Maguire. And that conversation they have at the beginning where it's like, you're lazy, you're a brilliant kid, but you're not giving it your all. Mm-hmm. And Peter's like, I'm trying to do better. Great callback in No Way Home eventually. But that whole trying to do better line hits so hard because we see what his 9 to 5 looks like earlier in the previous scenes. So I think the introduction of Otto Octavius, the scientist, was great. The transformation was haunting and incredible, and the way it was shot, a lot of that being practical too. If you see any behind the scenes clips, like they built those mechanical arms and they put them to work. The one thing I really get annoyed by, especially with modern comic book movies, is the evil weapon is possessing the pure-hearted person. We saw it right recently in Thor: Love and Thunder with the Necro sword being the source of why Gore is evil. We saw it in No Way Home with the Goblin disease tripping out Norman Osborn back and forth.
Goblin disease.
And freaking what was the most recent one? Oh, Scarlet Witch with the book, the Darkhold and everything. Like, it's becoming a trope that's bothering me again more and more because of modern comic book movies. And then in hindsight, I look back and I see something like Spider-Man 2, which, of course, 2004, it's going to be a little campier, but it almost bothers me more in that movie because of the surroundings of it. And yeah, I'm over the MacGuffins controlling our villains. Like, give us villains with true motivations, not just because their evil gadgets tell them to do things.
I wrote tentacles gone wild.
I love that you said it, because that is a good point. It's almost like I wonder if the writers just don't want to say this person is just a terrible person for whatever reason. There has to be some. It's not their fault. It's a dark force of some kind. Because I don't know. It's a good
Isn't
point.
it the
though.
same thing that happened in the first one too with Green Goblin? He was like a
goblin disease.
Yeah, he just got goblined.
And to give it one more example too, the previous Marvel movie, because we're just on a roll right now with evil weapons controlling the villains, the 10 Rings and Shang-Chi. Like the Mandarin was no stand-up guy beforehand, but the 10 Rings were corrupting his mind and making him think that he could still get his wife back and everything. It's a trope that's being exhausted in the modern age of cinema.
Yeah,
is that one of the reasons Thanos was so great? Is because he was like, nah, this is who I am.
Yeah,
I'm evil.
Yeah, like
Deal
that
with it.
is. Yeah.
I want to just take out half the universe. Deal with it.
Yeah. And he's just tried to be more evil with his weapons. I'm already evil. I'm just going to get more evil.
Andy, I got to ask you this question. This is something I've been wanting to ask you since I watched this movie. You are a writer. You write movies and you wrote a lot of short films and things like that. There was a line here, or there was a moment where Dr. Octavius says that writing is more advanced and difficult and complex than science is. And I'm asking you, do you think this line was in here because the dialogue was written by writers and not scientists?
100%. Yeah, science is way harder. I didn't even catch that. That's pretty funny.
I just imagine the writers being like, writing is the most difficult and impressive thing you can do.
Wink. Well, I got to talk about my man Bruce Campbell though. I just love Sam Raimi throws him in there. His last cameo he had in was it No Way Home, where he's the hot dog?
Was that
hot dog one?
No, that was
Multiverse of Madness.
Madness. Yeah.
Oh, that's what that was. That's right.
I was gonna say Multitudes of Madness, but Multiverse of Madness.
I just love how he just like always, because I think in the last Spider-Man, he wasn't like the ring announcer or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He was the ring announcer for the wrestling match.
I just love him getting snuck into these movies. But again, I was kind of like, he's pointing to the signs, how you can't get in. But I'm like, Toby, you're Spider-Man. Like, fuck this guy up and go in. Like, I don't know why he's just like, oh, okay. All right.
I would 100% be a villain, I think, if I had superpowers. Because I'm with you, Andy. I'd be a little bit like, bro, I'm going to throw you across the room. Get out of my way. I'm going to go inside.
You can't get in. Just like web his mouth. Can't hear you.
At the very least, I'd be more of an Iron Man type hero where everyone would definitely know I have superpowers.
Just telling everybody. I had one thing that I wanted to ask you guys. So he goes to the payphone, Peter does, to call MJ. This was 2004. Did we not have cell phones then?
I don't know if Peter Parker can afford a phone bill.
Is that what it was
going on for him?
By the way, subtle, small characters. This movie is great with like side characters, I think, that maybe don't necessarily play a big part, but like Bruce Campbell just have a lot of personality. The landlords were fantastic as just being these over the top characters that were cracking me up the whole movie, where he's like, he said something like, I've got a good line
too, yeah.
Eyes
like a rodent or something.
Like a rodent. He stares at him. I was like, dude, this guy's killing me. He's great.
And his daughter was clearly into Peter Parker, and he's just, he's not catching on. It's like MJ's moved on, man. This girl's like trying to make you. She's trying to cook or whatever she was doing in the background.
We'll talk about that. We'll get into that because that's another scene that happens that I want to talk about. But I want to move on as we get to Otto's starting to realize that the arms are taking over his brain, but he also has to finish his work. To pay for it, he's going to steal the money he needs from the bank that Peter is at refinancing his mom's loan. We get a bank scene fight, and Otto takes Aunt May, and they fight on the side of a building, but it's Aunt May who gets the knockout blow and distracts Otto to allow Spider-Man to make the save. The Bugle is excited about this new villain, but for now, they need Peter to go to the ball. While there, Harry Osborn is kind of a jerk about Spider-Man and slaps Peter when MJ shows up with Captain Jameson and really lets Peter have it before Peter finds out she's going to marry the captain. On the way home, Spider-Man's powers continue to deteriorate. Liam, the big story here, I guess, with the movie is that it's not just that his life is falling apart on one end and he's struggling with both, but now his body is saying you can't do both, and he's not able to even use his powers as Spider-Man, and that's the big confrontation he's having right now, or conflict he's having right now.
Yeah, and it's a genius way of giving him this kind of character evolution, because as most trilogies go, the second movie tends to be the darkest. And even though this movie is still very fun and still very kid-centric, there are very dark elements of like struggling to remember who you are and stuff like that. And when he eventually kind of gives up the suit because he's so dejected at balancing all the different aspects, it really does hit, because, you know, life has just dealt him a hard hand. Life has dealt him a lot of big expectations, and he just can't fulfill it anymore. So I do love it's straight from the page onto the screen when he has the suit in the trash bin and he's walking away. It's an incredible frame in this movie. And then beyond that too, you mentioned the bank scene. So comic booky. So like, of course, this like 70-something-year-old Aunt May, no matter what happens to her in this fight, she is going to have a heart attack from the stress and most likely die in a real life scenario. Yet here we are in this movie, and she's dangling off of a skyscraper by the cane. And I'm like, God bless this woman for just hanging in there, because at the end of the day, that's some core strength that most people don't have past their 50s. So good for her there. But it's a great comic booky scene, and it's a great like tone shift immediately when I believe they're sitting in a cafe or something, or maybe no, it's the bank vault specifically. The cafe with MJ comes later, but when there's the big explosion and Doc Ock arrives, broad daylight too. Like, this guy is someone who is able to communicate this menacing nature even when, you know, it's not dark out. Like, I love that about Doc Ock. And you mentioned the Bugle stuff. They love him because he's a new villain, and they can put some pizzazz behind him. And what a great conversation in hindsight when Jameson's talking with one of his editors, and he's like, what about Doctor Strange? And he's like, I like it, but it's taken. And it's like, here we are 18 years later, Sam Raimi directs a Doctor Strange movie. It's all amazing. And that line, it aged like fine wine.
That is something I did make the note about the Doctor Strange name drop, but I didn't even put two and two together.
Yeah, that's great.
Director. But I wanted to talk to you, and Liam, I'm going to double up and follow up with you on this, because this whole movie feels like it was just on the cusp of like a MCU, but it just didn't have the ability to be an MCU, talking about things like Doctor Strange, and you could almost feel it was trying to be something bigger than just the individual movie, but due to all the different reasons it couldn't be. Is that just me kind of projecting, or did it feel like this? Like I said, I don't know how to explain it, but it was like it was almost there, but there just wasn't anything for it to grab onto, if that makes sense.
They were definitely planting seeds for a larger world around, even if those seeds could never sprout. The other one that comes to mind is Dr. Kirk Connors on the university campus and everything, who fans know he becomes the Lizard, and he's actually the main antagonist of Andrew Garfield's first Amazing Spider-Man movie. But yeah, little name drops like that, like those are intentional, and I don't know if they're intentional, but I don't know if the purpose is a wink at the audience, or if the purpose is, hey, maybe we could get something out of that one day. Because remember, 2004, we're a year or 2 years before X-Men The Last Stand. Comic book movies as a whole are coming out like once a year, maybe, across Marvel and DC. So having these little name drops here and there, and having this idea of maybe playing with a bigger world, it was very safe to do, because you weren't stepping on the toes of any other studio. I'm wearing this Morbius shirt, ironically, right now. Morbius, a movie that I unfortunately had to see earlier this year, made a lot of winks and nods to possibly there being a bigger world around it. I remember there's one line at the beginning in a flashback scene where they mentioned to the young Morbius, they're like, you know, there's a school for gifted young people like you. I'm like, you can't tease the X-Men. You don't own the rights to those characters.
Right.
If you did that in 2004, fans would love it, because it would be like, oh, maybe there's a greater world out there. Nowadays, it's very territorial with these cinematic universes. Don't tease anything you don't intend to bring to life.
Yeah, fans are so much more educated about that kind of stuff now, as far as like who has rights to what. And I can't imagine going back to 2004 and even knowing who has the rights to the X-Men versus Spider-Man or whatever. But yeah, it was not to go completely off the rail here, but Sony, just let let Disney make these movies. Just whatever you do, just let them make the movies. Let's let them have it. Do what they do. I mean, you get your cut too. I'm not saying give away money, but come on, let them do it. They're better at it.
I said that in a recent tweet because I admittedly the majority of my followers care about my Marvel content, and I tweet wrestling news, and they're like, "Shut up, tweet some Marvel stuff." But of course, I had to share the news of Triple H getting creative control of Raw and SmackDown, and I was like, for my non-wrestling followers, this is the equivalent of Kevin Feige getting the Sonyverse, and everyone was like, "Oh, okay, I get what you're saying there." And like, yeah, no, it's a big thing. Like the creatives behind these movies do dictate a lot of how much people are engaged with them. And at least in 2004, because there was so much less competition, if you will, just because there were less movies, I think Sony just made better quality because they didn't feel like they had to catch up with everyone else around them. Nowadays, it's like, oh man, everyone's trying to be Marvel. We saw how that worked out for DC the past decade. Sony non-Spider-Man movies, Morbius, Venom, whatever's going on with Kraven the Hunter, it feels a little just like, just stick to what you're good at and one step at a time.
Just get a licensing fee and then let them do the work. Let MCU do the work. But Andy, I want to do a little inside baseball here that no one else will get but you and I. But the bank scene. Have you been to, where we DJ, Liam? So we DJ here in LA, and
was that
that's a venue.
Was that the Majestic?
That's the Majestic in downtown LA.
I decided, and young Joe McHale.
Yeah, and another guy, by the way. You're like, hey, there's that guy. I get told I look like Joel McHale a lot.
More handsome.
I think I could see it. Yeah, the little swoosh of the hair and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I get told that's the one I get the most is Joel McHale. I'm always like, you sure I don't look like Chris Hemsworth though?
Any Hemsworth?
Any Hemsworth?
Liam? No.
The third Hemsworth?
The other one? Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you guys one question too. Liam, you mentioned when Spidey puts the suit down in the alleyway. Is that the same alleyway as the famous upside down kiss? It kind of looked like that was like the same spot. I didn't know if they did that on purpose, but I was kind of like, I think that looks familiar.
I've never actually heard whether or not it was confirmed to be the same spot, but it would make a lot of sense. Like that's where Spider-Man was like born. This is where Spider-Man dies. Like there's like a bit of a parallelism there.
So as we move on, Peter sees a doctor because he's having no luck figuring out what's wrong with him and why he's losing his powers. Then after a vision from Uncle Ben, Peter decides to get rid of Spider-Man forever. And with his powers gone, Peter starts to enjoy life without the need to be a hero and to be able to focus on his personal life, like finally seeing MJ's show. He uses his poetry to try to win back MJ, but she's not having it. And meanwhile, the Bugle is excited about the end of Spider-Man, and Peter is learning it's harder to walk away from those that need help than he thought, as he saves a baby from a burning building, but doesn't save someone else who's also inside. After some cake with his neighbor, Peter sees Aunt May, who isn't bothered about Peter being the reason the love of her life was taken from her prematurely, and instead says that we all need a hero to teach us how to hold on a little longer, even if it means giving up what we love the most. There's a number of things here I want to talk about. But first, Andy, I want to talk to you about the Bugle. They're excited about the end of Spider-Man. They got what they wanted. I love that. I love J. Jonah Jameson is what I
was going to say. We've gone this far and we haven't even mentioned him. He's amazing.
If this movie was around today, Andy, tell me that J. Jonah Jameson wouldn't have a Disney series, a Marvel series on right now, just following the exploits of the Bugle. Because I could watch that all day.
Is it too late? J.K. Simmons still around? That he just did that same character. Like,
I'd be down. Completely to see the Bugle.
Let's call it
Bugle. Running the Bugle.
I'm in. Yeah.
And him getting news stories about supervillains or heroes, or him condemning the heroes and like just being a menace.
Way more. I could have gone for way more of him. Like I just felt like there wasn't enough. But maybe that's the key to his character. You only see him every so often, so you're like, oh, okay. Liam, like Stephen A. Smith.
Liam, you've seen a lot. You know comic book movies. You know comic book castings. Is J. Jonah Jameson the best casting of all time? I feel like they nailed that to perfection.
It's a tough one to say out of every character and every actor pairing because, we have our Downey Jr.'s and Iron Mans, we have our Hugh Jackmans and Wolverines. But it's hard to not put him in that conversation. I feel like the only reason why he's not in that conversation, at least in the short lists that people will make, is because he's very much a side character. Like he's not leading his own franchise. But when it comes to like seeing the animated cartoon or seeing some Spider-Man comics and imagining how J. Jonah Jameson talks, like J.K. Simmons just nails it. Like the cigar, the flat top, the mustache, like the way he like talks to his staff and everything, how he's so quick-witted and all that.
Good.
And he doesn't even realize like he's not like spitting like witty dialogue because he's trying to be clever. That's just kind of how he talks. And the way like, oh, Peter, you're fired. Up, nope, you're unfired. Come back here. I need your stuff. Little things like that. He's definitely in that conversation. And I will say as well, especially because the Charles Xavier we got in Doctor Strange 2 was a multiversal variant. So it wasn't like, oh, Patrick Stewart is the only actor that can ever play this character. We need him back. It was more of a wink and a nod. Hey, multiverse stuff. J.K. Simmons in No Way Home plays a J. Jonah Jameson from the MCU. That is a different iteration of J. Jonah Jameson compared to the Tobey Maguire trilogy. And that's just because he's irreplaceable. Like he's that damn good that they're going to take him, spin him, make him more of a modern, crazy conspiracy theorist on the internet, shave his head and all that. Still retain that same like charm that makes J. Jonah Jameson so special. Like if you needed any type of stamp of approval for why he is such a timeless character and why this is like a perfect casting, that's it right there.
You hit the nail on the head. That was perfect. That's why you're at Comic Book, is because stuff like that.
I would wonder who's the opposite. Who's the worst one? Who's the one that's cast and you go,
I don't want to bury someone.
No, I said I would wonder. I'm just wondering. I didn't say Liam had to say.
Well, I'm curious
if you say Chris Hemsworth.
Chris Hemsworth, nothing left for.
It wouldn't be an actor. It would be a character that they just can't seem to nail. Someone they've recast so many times. And yeah, that's a hard one.
Spider-Man?
Maybe someone. Well, Spider-Man, it's more of a passing the torch. It's less about like we're gonna try this again and again. That's a good question to ponder. I feel like it would have to be someone from like Fantastic Four, just because they've yet to really nail that franchise.
Yeah.
Even though they've had some really good castings, they've just missed on the plots.
Yeah. Fantastic Four is probably a good one. Also, Nick Cage's Ghost Rider was a little underwhelming, but I don't know how much of that was him and how much of that was just what they had for that one. Andy, you had mentioned this before, so I want to go back to you with this one. The neighbor brings him cake. Obviously, we're like, this girl likes Tobey Maguire or likes Peter Parker, but nothing comes of it. Was I supposed to pull something from this other than just he has options? Like, this was kind of a pointless scene.
Yeah, I was wondering about her character and also Elizabeth Banks's character. I forget. What's her name? Betsy Brandt?
Oh, Betty Brandt.
Yeah. Like, I was kind of like, oh, are those supposed to be other options for... Because they both kind of flirt with him, but nothing ever happens. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what that was supposed to be.
Elizabeth Banks definitely felt like a sometime down the line, depending on how many sequels, something was going to come of it. But the neighbor, I don't even think they gave her a name, did they?
I don't think so.
If they did, it clearly wasn't memorable enough for any of us to register.
Is she a character in the... I don't know if she's a character in the comics that I remember or have seen either. So I don't know if it was like a wink, nudge, nudge either, but maybe there was. I'm just missing it somewhere. But
I thought I remember reading that there were original characters for this movie, but don't quote me on that. I don't need people to call me out.
Right. I mean, maybe she was. I didn't know. I was wondering maybe if it's something somewhere that, like, if you're a big fan of the comic that knows it better than I do offhand, might go,
the landlord's daughter.
The landlord's daughter. Remember, she'd always bring cake over. I don't know, but yeah, I was watching that. I was like, I wonder if there was something that was supposed to be there that got cut out at some point. But
did we get to the part 2 with Doc Ock and sorry, I refer to him as their actor as James Franco and Doc Ock when they're talking and he's like looking for whatever? Did we already get to that?
No, that's near the end. Let's
but that's after the cake though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's after the cake.
Oh, did you get to the cake?
The end comes after
you got to the cake.
Andy.
Did you get to the cake? You mentioned the cake, so I'm like, all right.
A lot of stuff happens after the cake, Andy.
All right, well let's hear what happened after the cake.
So Peter decides to try and fail to get his powers back while MJ tries to see if her captain is Spider-Man. And when he's not, she goes running back to Peter. And now Peter's like, too little, too late. And she goes for a kiss. And would you look at the rock on that finger? Why is she messing around with broke Peter? Anyways, doesn't matter though. The car is flying through a window and Otto says, I'm taking the girl until I get Spider-Man. Parker drops his glasses and clenches his fist, and he grabs the suit, and the two fight on buildings and on trains, and they battle across the city until Otto rips out the brakes of the train and runs while Spider-Man is forced to stop the train with his mask off. Firing webs all over, he eventually stops the train just in time. The effort causes him to pass out, and the people on the train see Peter Parker, and for the first time in the movie, Parker and Spider-Man seem like one, and while he's a superhero, he's still also just a kid. This doesn't stop Dr. Octopus from taking advantage and capturing Spider-Man, however. This was, I want to go to that scene, Liam, and where the car goes through the window. And I make a little fun of MJ for bouncing back and forth on who she likes and the size of the ring on her finger. But this is, to me, when I think of this movie, this is actually the scene I always think about, is them in the cafe, the car coming through the wall or the window, and him clenching his fist. I remember when I was in the movie theater, I saw this. I go, ooh, that's cool. Walk me through this scene and kind of this moment where Peter realizes he can no longer hide from being Spider-Man.
Yeah, it's one of the most gifable moments from this movie. I feel like I see this on Twitter like every now and then, of just the transition of a peaceful, serene coffee shop to all of a sudden the car coming through. Otto Octavius saying, I need Spider-Man and I'm taking the girl. And I will say on top of this scene, especially after what goes down with the bank, I wonder, Peter, what's the need in hiding your secret identity? Because all your loved ones still get kidnapped regardless. Like it's always just wrong place, wrong time for Aunt May, MJ, Harry. Well, I know Harry Osborn gets the vendetta later on, but that's about it. His short list of close people always just in danger.
And Andy, with this scene, this is where, and I guess to your point about the danger, I guess I'll add this instead. I'm going to get one thing that bothered me was this train scene. And something that bothered me about this train scene is, and throughout this movie, this is one of the takeaways I didn't like about this movie is Spider-Man is supposed to be have a secret identity, but it felt like by the end of this movie, everyone in New York knew who Spider-Man was. By the end of this movie, the people on the train, spoiler, MJ figures out later, Harry figures out later. It feels like Dr. Octopus should have been able to figure it out at some point. I was a little bothered, Andy, that everyone seemed to figure out who Spider-Man was in this movie.
Well, two things. One, the part I mentioned did happen already. It's when Doc Ock comes to Harry and he wants to get Liam. You probably know the exact thing, but he's like looking for something that he gives him later. He goes, "You find Peter Parker, then I'll get you this." And he goes, "Oh, okay." And he leaves. But I was kind of like, Doc Ock, you got these 4 tentacles. Just go get it. Kill Harry. Grab what you need. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. But what was the other question?
I don't like you proving yourself right on the show. But we have, so I was asking you about everyone who, basically this movie, everyone figures out who Spider-Man is.
I mean, it's just a lesson that he's got to get a better mask, right? This comes off very easily.
How do you get a better? That mask literally covers every inch of his face.
It keeps falling off, though. I mean, he's on a train and it just like, was it fly off or something? I don't know.
This scene, Andy, the cafe scene, this movie directed by Sam Raimi, this scene, and now that you see his fingerprints all over this, but I felt like this scene really felt like Sam Raimi with like the zoom ins and like the way it was edited and put together. And from this moment on, it really felt like this was absolutely one of his movies.
Even when Doc Ock like flies out, he's got that, he just like flies out of there, bashes into the car. Like, yeah, it's just very cool. I do think the action scenes, I do agree with you guys that the special effects aren't quite as good as, movies today, but I do think like the action scenes were still fun. Like I still found myself like going like, oh, well, it was still like good, like action scenes, like with the train and everything like that. Like there was still tension.
One of the things that I loved about this little scene, and just to go back to J. Jonah Jameson, is I love how he was like, I ran Spider-Man out of town, and now he's the one person that can save us. And then they're like, what's that? He's a thief. He took his stuff back. I'll get you, Spider-Man. I love the flip on a dime.
The quick turn
of J. Jonah Jameson.
What about Tobey Maguire's face though on holding the train back? I feel like I've seen that a lot.
Yeah, I love Tobey Maguire. I don't know if it was intentional, but he had some terrible facial expressions throughout the movie that I don't know if they didn't age well, or I don't know what the situation was, but he had a ton of those just like I try to imagine if this was like a Captain America movie, like Chris Evans would not be making a face like that trying to stop the train.
That's why you got to keep that mask on, Toby.
Liam, I want to talk one more time about the special effects here, because it did feel like the special effects were here, like really showing here. And one of the things I like about doing these movies like in a row, as far as time goes, is you get an idea of sort of what to expect from special effects. And this was a time period, I think, looking back, that a lot of movies, because special effects were doing so much stuff, they were definitely overreaching what they should be doing. You saw it with like the Matrix sequels and the Star Wars prequels, where they were doing things that were very cutting edge, but at the same time, sort of showing that by showing how far they could go, they were showing how far they weren't, if that makes sense. And I felt like that showed a lot, especially in these scenes.
Yeah, that's honestly a perfect way to describe it. Is, it was the shiny new toy. It was CGI, like visual effects, and then we can save so much money by doing CGI and going away from practical effects, that you were sacrificing a little bit of the quality as well. And I will say the train sequence, to me, I don't see a lot of the visual effects woes, except when it comes to sometimes Spider-Man and Doc Ock look like video game characters, the way they're being animated. Like, they don't look like human beings. I'm like, it's clear that wasn't done with strings and practicality. This was done on a computer screen with VFX in post-production. But I will say I really appreciate the train scene, because I do think it was kind of, when you look at the history of comic book movies and pushing the boundaries of action scenes and doing stuff that hadn't been seen before, I think this at the time was very revolutionary. And this is a scene that a lot of people point to as being like the iconic superhero action scene that has, like, nowadays it's been lapped time and time again in terms of the quality we're getting nowadays, like on Disney Plus, like from Falcon and Winter Soldier. We had a whole aerial sequence with Falcon in the premiere episode, and everyone's just like, yeah, I guess it was fine. I'm like, you tell that to people 2 decades ago, they're like, what do you mean you're getting that on your TV for $7 a month? Like,
that is so true.
But like this scene, I do think if you didn't see it when it first came out, it might not be as impressive to you. But when you go back and revisit it and realize how far we've come and how that scene's taking place in 2004, when it honestly has better effects and some effects in 2012's Avengers movie, it kind of goes to show like how much Raimi and company were willing to push the boundaries. And did they push them a little bit too far? In certain frames, I think yes. But overall, I'm a big fan of the train sequence.
I like just the idea of it too. There's something just so pure about the hero trying to stop a train filled with people from falling off the edge. It's very Superman. You imagine the bridge is out or whatever, and someone trying to stop the train. There's just something classic about it as far as what the story is there.
Yeah, I feel like it's something that you've seen back in like silent film, when you see like a train out of control, what's going to happen. So it's definitely something you've seen before, but they made it completely different.
So Doc Ock delivers Spider-Man, and he takes the tritium, which, Andy, as you say, he could have just done in the first place. But
yeah,
Dr. Octopus is just misunderstood. He's not a bad guy. Harry Osborn rips off Spider-Man's masks and sees that Spider-Man is Peter Parker, and is actually a little more shocked than he should have been, all things considered. The Doctor goes back to his lair, and he works on his science project as Spider-Man comes in, and the fight continues. The power of the sun starts sucking things into it again, and the heroes fight, and a well-timed move causes the Octopus Man to shock himself out of commission, but Spider-Man has to stop the thing from exploding. So he convinces the Doctor to turn things off, even as the tentacles try to fight back. Eventually, we see the good win out as Dr. Octopus drowns the energy ball, and MJ sees Peter as Spider-Man, and they admit that they love each other, and Spider-Man is like, I just can't be tied down right now. You know what I mean? And he sends her back to the captain.
So
MJ hugs the captain, but she's looking at Spider-Man while Harry sharpens his knife and speaks to his old man. we end the movie with MJ leaving the captain at the altar, going back to Spider-Man. And I mean, she goes back to Peter Parker, not Spider-Man. And we get played out to the sweet sounds of Dashboard Confessional.
Jack, let me ask you a question. What was the song that got played out in the last Spider-Man, in the first Spider-Man?
In the first, it's the I hear that it's the I am so high, I get to heaven. What's the name?
Nickelback.
I can't think of it. Yeah, there we go.
It's Nickelback. I'm like, they went from Nickelback to Dashboard Confessional. It's kind of a funny, you don't think of that with superhero movies.
Andy, I want to talk to you about Harry taking off the mask and just being shocked that Spider-Man is Peter Parker. There's a part of me that's like, I get it, but I'm also like, your friend who's never who is the only person that knows where Spider-Man is and what Spider-Man's doing. It's very Clark Kent that he didn't figure it out.
Yeah. But
I'm nitpicking because I'm being a jerk about it, but part of me was like, dude, how did you not know?
Of course. Well, I mean, even Aunt May, all of a sudden she's like, Peter leaves her at the bank, and then all of a sudden Spider-Man's there, helping, and then I don't know. It all, if you really think about it, these people are.
I think Aunt May knew. I think that's why she said what she said to him about giving up what you love.
Well, maybe Harry knew too, and he was just like, "What?" I don't know. For you not to know, it's pretty ridiculous. But I mean, that's the whole point, right? You're not supposed to know who Spider-Man is.
Liam, this was one of those times where we get we talked about how the villain is a good guy, but he's controlled by the weapon. But this time we get to see the redemption of the character at the end of the movie, saving the day essentially by taking down everything with him. Do you like it when you get the redemption at the end, or do you just want to see evil get thwarted?
Well, I mentioned the whole frustration with the weapons controlling these villains nowadays, and I appreciate a redemption arc when it is for someone who had purely malicious intents from the beginning, and then it's like they start to see how things should be. This villain in particular, because of the way they set him up at the beginning, how he was kind of a pure heart and everything, I like the idea that he kind of brought down the creation. I think it would have been, I don't know how in a world where, say, Spider-Man takes out Otto, kills him, and then now he's tasked with putting out a sun. I don't know how that would work. You just web it up a bunch of times, just kind of tetherball it or something. I have no idea how it goes any other way if Otto doesn't get that kind of redemption. But I never thought twice about it. I thought it made sense for his character arc in the moment.
I love, there's a scene here again, because I always feel like MJ is toxic. There's literally a scene where Spider-Man's holding up the building and he's like, "This is so heavy, we might die." And she's like, "Do you love me?" And he's like, yeah, I love you. She's like, "Even though you said you didn't?" He's like, yeah, I'm holding up the whole building. Just get out of here. I was thinking, just weird timing, MJ. Just maybe help him. I don't know. I don't know. It's just a funny thing to be talking about there. Is he's literally like,
"You're not even paying attention to me anymore. I'm holding up a building.
Remember when you missed my plays?" It's like, oh,
I was busy saving the world. Sorry.
But there is the big thing. I make the comment about she goes back to Spider-Man, but I mean Peter Parker. But there is that little bit of it that's part of the story. And Liam, I know that's a big part of Spider-Man and MJ is, does she really love Spider-Man or does she really love Peter Parker? And that's kind of what we end with here at the end of the movie. They paint it up like it's a happy ending, but I know MJ. I've seen her in 2 movies now. She likes Spider-Man. She doesn't like Peter Parker.
That's I like that perspective because a lot of people often say that with other characters out there too, when it comes to who's more in control of the person. Is Bruce Wayne the identity, or is Batman the real identity and Bruce is just the alter ego and stuff like that? So who is MJ actually attracted to? I mean, through a movie and 3/4 of a movie, it seems like it's Peter, but she's only willing to fully invest and let bygones be bygones once she knows that he's kind of got this superhero celebrity status.
Yep.
So yeah, I wonder if that is what helped push her over the edge. Does she get more perspective on, do his excuses make a lot more sense now that she knows? Absolutely. But are those excuses forgiven because he's been doing good things, or are those excuses forgiven because he's New York's favorite Spider-Man? Like that's a good question. And based on how the third movie goes, yeah, I'd say maybe it leans a little bit more into she's in love with Spider-Man.
Well, yeah, because doesn't she say like "Go get him, Tiger" or something at the end too? What does she
Yeah.
say at the end? Yeah, so
Yeah.
she's got the nerd and the bad boy. She's got them both.
All I'll say is when she was sitting there with the captain and they're planning out their wedding, she said, "Let me try kissing you upside down." She did not say, "Talk to me about photography and science."
That's a really good point. That's a really good point.
She's like, "Can you tell me about photography?" No, why? No reason. I'm going to go see my friend Peter. But in any case, I think that kind of wraps up the movie. That does it for this round. Liam, you're going to get the last words here on it. So overall thoughts, very fun to go revisit, very fun to see again. I think something about Peter, when we compare the different Spider-Man, I think that Peter definitely has a wholesomeness to him. He's definitely a little bit more emo, I think, than some of the other Spider-Men, but I feel like there's a wholesomeness to him that gives a lasting impression for him. I don't know if this movie holds up as a superhero movie, but it definitely pushed boundaries. So it's fun to go revisit and compare to everything that came out, especially with No Way Home coming out recently. Andy, Liam, like I said, you get the last word. Andy, any final thoughts on the movie?
I mean, yeah, kind of like what you were saying too. Like when this movie first came out, I was like, this might be the greatest movie ever. Like, and I was even like, like Terminator
I say that
2.
to every movie I see in theater, by the way.
But you think about sequels, like Terminator 2, I thought was better than the first one, and Godfather 2 maybe is better than the first one. Like this, I was like, man, this might be better than the first one. And then, yeah, kind of, I wouldn't say disappointed, but I was sort of like, oh, this isn't quite as good as I remember. But I think it's just, there's been so many movies, so many Spider-Man movies that have come out since that are like, whoa, they just like really went all in on Spider-Man and all the other movies. But I thought it was a good movie. And I really liked the end, how they brought Green Goblin in. He had a cameo, a little Willem Dafoe cameo at the end. So I thought that was cool to kind of be like, because I felt like most movies always just have like the one bad guy. So now you have Doc Ock that is still alive, and then now you have Green Goblin, and then the next one. How many? There's like 3 villains or something. You got Sandman and Venom, and is Green Goblin in the third one?
Yeah,
I mean,
Venom.
here he is. Yeah,
the new Goblin, as they call him.
The new Goblin.
Yeah.
Okay,
he has a snowboard. He's not the same as the other Goblin.
Total early 2000s, by the way, have the snowboards.
I kind of want to see that. I don't even know if I've seen the third one. I probably have, and just went, oh.
I love the third one. The third one is my favorite of the trilogy.
I'll have to watch it.
I recognize that the story is not there compared to the other ones, but it's more of a comic book brought to life. There's more stuff in it, and sometimes when I'm 6 years old in the movie theater, I need an excuse to eat my popcorn, and conversations in the cafe with MJ. That's not going to do it.
Well said, especially because I was just thinking as we're talking about this movie didn't really have any action until the very end. It was all just kind of character development. But
I thought that too, yeah.
In Spider-Man 3's defense, I'll say this. I think it suffered from fans getting a bad case of they should have, instead of just enjoying the movie.
They were already spoiled.
Fan fiction writing it instead of just enjoying what they were given. And then when they didn't get what they fan fictioned, they got crabby about it. But Liam, you get the last word. Like I said, any final thoughts on Spider-Man 2 and revisiting it?
Well, I will say also to Andy's point, the nice little tease, like it's before the age of post-credit scenes, before they like really got taken off and was in every Marvel movie, and very recently the Buzz Lightyear movie did like 4 post-credit scenes. Really? There was no post-credit scene in this movie, but the ending with Harry might as well have been, because it's him discovering the Goblin cabinet, him understanding what he has to do for the next movie. And I remember the first time I watched this movie being like scared, like, oh man, like Harry is going to become a bad dude.
Avenge me.
And the whole avenge me stuff is like a little ridiculous with the mirror, but compared to the previous Green Goblin, who is like just a guy who is dealing with the Goblin disease and he wasn't purely evil, we have Harry with motivations and all this Goblin technology and nothing controlling him. Like, what a nice change of pace for a villain. And then they did kind of botch the execution in the third movie with that storyline because they were juggling too many things at once. But as a standalone moment in this movie, it's like a great teaser trailer for what's to come. So I really do appreciate that. As a whole, I do think this movie is incredibly fun, but I also think it's incredibly dated. I think a lot of people watch it with kind of nostalgia blinders, and people put this movie in conversation, at least in my circles. People talk about the first Avengers movie, The Dark Knight, Richard Donner's Superman, Spider-Man 2 as like a way to kind of give like an all-time comic book movie list variety. I think there are better Spider-Man movies than this. Not to say that this one's bad, but I think people put it on a pedestal it doesn't deserve to be on. Like being in a conversation with The Dark Knight, you got to earn those stripes. And I don't know if this movie's there, but at the same time, even if the CGI isn't as perfect and polished as it could be in a modern age, even if some of the dialogue is corny, the heart, the story, just kind of the overall vibe of this movie, it leaves you with a smile on your face. And there's a reason why people have nostalgia with this movie. So yeah, overall, I think it's a good time. It's not going to make a top 10 list for me, but it's very important for the history of comic book movies. That'll be my big superlative, a very important piece on this comic book movie timeline.
I love it. Great way to wrap it up. I will say it goes on my top 10 list, but only in public. I think in the shadows, in my secret list, that's the real list. It doesn't actually go on the top 10 list, but in the public list.
I lost like 20 Twitter followers when I said Spider-Man 3 was my favorite of the trilogy. Like those Spider-Man fans are no joke.
Yeah, on Twitter.
How dare
Spider-Man
you.
2, one of the best, but in private where I have my real list.
Fantastic Four is your number one.
Fantastic Four. 2, Rise of the Silver Surfer. So Liam, I like to play a little game with Andy here to wrap things up. It's a very simple one. It's the 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon game. I want to see if Andy Rossi can connect one of the actors from this movie to Kevin Bacon in 6 moves. Andy, I'm kind of curious to see how this one goes.
Yeah, this is a good one. You'll like this one. So Kirsten Dunst, your favorite MJ, was in Interview with a Vampire with Brad Pitt, who is in Sleepers with Kevin Bacon.
Liam, every movie we do leads to Sleepers with Kevin Bacon. It always goes to sleep, whether it's because Robert De Niro's in that movie and Brad Pitt's in that movie, Dustin Hoffman. Almost every time we do this, Andy takes the Sleepers route.
It's a good path.
How many degrees was that?
2, 3. Dunst, Pitt, Bacon.
Oh, that would beat me. I was gonna go pure comic book movie route and go Alfred Molina, Otto Octavius in this movie, also Otto Octavius in No Way Home, Benedict Cumberbatch, Doctor Strange, Patrick Stewart, Charles Xavier, also James McAvoy, Charles Xavier in Days of Future Past, Kevin Bacon, Sebastian Shaw in X-Men First Class.
Yes.
The fact that you know all the character names, I think.
You know, it's funny you say that because that was my first thought, though, was Kevin Bacon's in First Class, so that's how you're going to get there, right? But no, not Andy. He sees the easy way. He sees the shortcut.
Yeah.
But that does it for us. Our next movie, we're going to 2005. We're going to talk about 40-Year-Old Virgin, and then we're going to go to 2006 to discuss Pursuit of Happiness, and then 2007, one of my all-time favorite comedies, Hot Rod.
Nice.
Talking about. That'll be a lot of fun. But that does it for us. You can find me at Real Jack Farmer across all social media. Andy, where can the world find you and what you're working on?
You can find me at Just Andy Rossi.
And Liam, where can the world catch up with all the cool stuff you're working on right now?
At Liam T. Crowley on all socials, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. And follow comicbook.com on socials as well, at Just Comic Book. I do TikTok content for them, interviews on the YouTube page, and a bunch of articles as well on comicbook.com.
Very cool. Thank you so much for being on the show. That does it for us this time, and we will see all of you next year.